Okay, hi, good morning, everyone. I hope you're all well, and Chodesh Tov. They say, Mishenichnes Adar Marbin B'Simcha, when the month of Adar comes in, we increase our Simcha. So it's brought down that even Adar Rishon, even though technically Adar is Adar Sheni, but we have a double Simcha, and people ask the question. It's a difficult question. I mean, Purim is not this month, Purim is next month, Purim Katan is this month. But people ask, should they tone down the Purim celebrations in light of the difficulties that we're facing? We're in a war. There are still hostages. People are dying. Although Baruch Hashem, 2 hostages did get freed. And it just seems logical, though, that Purim is specifically the one holiday that one should not downplay. Because what is Purim about? Purim is about the Jewish people facing dangers, existential dangers, and how Hashem, even in the darkness and the concealments, saves his people, and we give gratitude to that. So it seems that Purim is not a holiday to de-emphasize in this time of struggle. It's a time that we should, be especially grateful to HaKadosh Baruch Hu for the Nisim v'Niflais. So it's still Mishenichnas Adar Marbin B'Simcha, and that includes Adar Aleph as well as Adar Beis, and B'Ezras Hashem, at least by Adar Beis, we hope that the Simcha will be complete, and we should be Zochet to see Yeshua's Hashem. There's a famous phrase, although nobody knows where it's from. There's a very famous phrase. In fact, you can write a whole book on statements that everybody thinks are Mamarei Chazal, that in fact there's no Chazal. Yeshuat Hashem Keherafayin is a very famous phrase. The salvation of God comes in the blink of an eye. And typically a speaker will say, as Chazal say, Yeshua Hashem Keherafayin. But don't ask the speaker. I've been on that side of it. Where's the makor for that? The short answer is, it's in medieval writings. Now there is the Rishonim use it, but you're not going to be able to trace it. In fact, even one of the most famous drashas on this week's parsha, V'yasu li mikdash v'shachanti b'tocham, a very, very famous idea that we build a mikdash or a mishkan so God will reside in our heart and in our soul, that the real dwelling place of God is in the heart and soul of the Jewish people. A very beautiful and important thought, but sadly, it is not, such a lashon does not actually appear in a medrash. It is brought down in the Rishonim and the like. So, not that exact phrase, right? Rashi does not bring that exact phrase. So, so once again, there's all sorts of famous things. Now, conversely, I'll tell you this, there's a saying, Ein Navi B'Iro, right? In your own city, you're not a prophet. So where's that from? So the truth is, that is from the Christian Bible, actually. So we borrow from all sorts of sources. I heard that from my own Rosh Hashiva said, "Ein Navi B'Iro." It's not in Chazal. It's okay. Yeah, I'm sorry.
So if a person is born on Adar,
do
they get to celebrate twice?
Meaning their birthday?
Yeah, you're here. I might as well listen.
Well, there's no Isser of Baal Tosef on a birthday, but generally speaking, the birthday would be Adar Sheni. In fact, that's the. In fact, it's interesting that. Sure. Marvin B'Simcha. Now, the only exception is Yortzeit. It's an interesting issue why that's so. Let's say somebody died in a regular year, and this year is Adar Sheni. So when do you keep the Yortzeit? Now, the logic of the Jewish calendar would indicate Adar Sheni, because Adar Sheni is really Adar. Adar Aleph is the extra month. And Sfardim do paskin, that the Yortzeit in a leap year is Adar Sheni, which makes a lot of sense. And yet the Ramah says our minog is Adar Rishon. L'chumra, you keep 2 Yortzeits. L'chumra, you also keep the second, but the real Yortzeit is Adar Rishon, and that's very, very interesting. By the way, this is an interesting issue, just the other way around, where a person could have his bar mitzvah before somebody who was born before him. That would be if they were born in leap years. So one kid was born the 20th of Adar Aleph, and the other kid was born the 10th of Adar Sheni. In the year of their bar mitzvah, there's only one Adar. So one kid's bar mitzvah will be the 10th of Adar, and the other will be the 20th, even though he was born born later. That's an opposite situation where they were born in a leap year, and the bar mitzvah is the single year. So there are different questions about the two adars and the like. But going back to our main topic, our topic is basically we're looking at various mitzvos that are connected to Yetzias Mitzrayim. And if you recall, last week we discussed the Machlokes Ben Zoma and the Chachamim, which is actually in the Haggadah. It's the last Mishnah in the first parak of Brachos, but it's excerpted in the Haggadah, where there's a mitzvah every day to remember the Exodus. L'man tiskor es yom tzeitcha me'eretz Yisrael kol yemei chayecha. But the word call is superfluous. Call all the days of your life. So what is it coming to include? So according to Ben Zoma, it is coming to include even at night. You have to mention it even at night. According to the Chachamim, you don't mention it at night, but it's including Limot HaMashiach, that even after Mashiach comes and the miracles of redemption are so much greater, we still have to remember the Exodus. Now, the Gemara then goes on and explains, this is not in the Haggadah already, that in point of fact, it is Ben Zoma's position that you're not going to mention Yetzias Mitzrayim when Yemot HaMashiach comes. You're not going to do it. And that's why he uses call for night and not Yemot HaMashiach. And the basis for his argument is an explicit pasuk in the Navi Yirmiyahu, where Yirmiyahu says, Hinei Yamim Ba'im Nom Hashem. Behold, days are coming. This is a Besorah of Geula. Shelo Yaimar Eid. Chai Hashem asher heletchem me'eretz Mitzrayim. You will no longer say, by the life of God who took us out of Mitzrayim. You're not going to bother with that. Ela Chai Hashem asher heletchem, from all of the Gola. So Ben Zoma's argument is Yirmiyahu Hanavi tells us explicitly that the redemption of Mashiach is going to be so great that we're not going to talk about Yetzias Mitzrayim. The Gemara gives an example of a person who's walking on the road and gets attacked by a wolf, and he gets saved. And all he's doing is talking about the wolf. Wow, this wolf attacked me and I was saved. Till he turns the block and he meets a lion. And he gets saved by the lion. So he's no longer thinking about the wolf. He says, Baruch Hashem, I got saved from the lion. So the same thing. In other words, Ben Zoma's position actually is, again, we are not going to mention Yetziat Mitzrayim when Yemot HaMashiach comes. Now, what do the Chachamim say to that? So the Chachamim's argument is actually a very linguistically sound argument. They say that it does not mean we will not declare Yetziat Mitzrayim at all, but it means it'll be secondary. And it brings a similar proof to Yaakov Avinu. It says by Yaakov, Lo yikarei od shimcha Yaakov, Ki im Yisrael yiyashemecha. Your name shall no longer be Yaakov, the heel. Your name shall be Yisrael, you triumphed. Now, we know that in spite of that statement, Yaakov Avinu is still referred to as Yaakov, even though Yisrael is the Iker name. So Lo Yayomar O does not mean you don't mention it at all. It just means it's relegated to a secondary place. So the Chachamim's argument is, by analogy, the same way Lo Yayomar Od by Yaakov does not displace Yaakov, Lo Yayomar Od Chai Hashem asher heletchem me'eretz Mitzrayim does not replace Yetziat Mitzrayim. It's simply a matter of secondary. But be it as it may, the bottom line is there is a machlokes tanoim. Will we be maskir Yetziat Mitzrayim limot hamashiach? According to Ben Zoma, we will not. According to the Chachamim, we will. Now, the Rambam apparently paskins like Ben Zoma because the Rambam says you have to mention Mitzrayim day and night. So call is coming for night, and we exclude Yemot HaMashiach. So I had mentioned Rav Yosef Albo, who was a philosopher who lived around 150 or 200 years after the Rambam, and he wrote a famous sefer on Jewish philosophy called Sefer HaIkarim, where he actually took issue with the Rambam saying there are 13 principles of faith. And he says there's only 3 principles that a Jew has to believe in. A Jew has to believe in God, Mitziyot Hashem. A Jew has to believe in some sort of reward and punishment system. And a Jew has to believe that the Torah came from Hashem and was not made up by a human being. Everything else, Rav Albo argues, is a detail. In fact, in his language, it is not an ikar. Ikar means a root. It is not a shoresh. It is an anaf. It is a branch. So, for example, let's take a simple example. Let's imagine you had a Jew who believes in God and believes in the Torah, but he does not believe in physical resurrection of the dead. He does not believe that the body comes back. Who cares about the body anyway? According to the Rambam, the person might be the biggest tzaddik in the world. He's an apikoros and he's a heretic because he is denying a fundamental principle of Judaism, the 13th principle, which is physical resurrection. The Rambam would call him an apikoros. And by the way, it's so bizarre. The Rambam himself was accused of not believing in Tchiyas HaMesim because in the Mishnah Torah, he in fact almost ignores it, legamri. Hey, why aren't you bringing it up? So the Rambam himself was accused of denying his own Ikar Emunah. Right, the Rambam was declared to be an apikoros based on the Rambam's declaration of the principles of faith, and the Rambam had to write a letter defending himself, which is called Igeret Tchiyas HaMesim. Okay. Now, according to Rav Albo, here's what Rav Albo says. Tchiyas HaMesim is simply a detail in the reward and punishment system of God. Now, it's not true, as people say, Rav Albo didn't believe in physical resurrection. That's totally untrue. Rav Albo believed in everything the Rambam believed in. But as a matter of classification, he said, it's not an ikar, it is only an anaf. So if I don't believe in physical resurrection, according to Rav Albo, I am a mistaken person. Yeah, it's a ta'ut, but it's not kfira, it's not heresy. Right? And Rav Albo goes through different questions he has on the Rambam's Ikarim. In fact, even something as fundamental as, does God have a body? Now, if you read the books of the Nevi'im and Kesuvim, there is no question. There are many, many, many references. They call them anthropomorphic references, in which God is described in very physical terms. The hand of God, the eyes of God, even visualizations. In the book of Daniel, God is an old man with a long white beard sitting on a throne. I mean, that is exactly how he's described. And the Rambam says it's all metaphors, not true, etc., etc., etc. But and the Rambam says, if you believe that God has a physical body, that is a denial of Ikar Emunah. Ein lo guf, ein lo demut haguf. Rav Albo says, surely the Rambam is correct that God is not physical, but if you made a mistake based on your misreading of biblical verses, you are not a heretic. You're just making a mistake. Now, the Breitowitz says it in a more pungent manner. When the Rambam says, he who believes that God has a body is a kofar that does not have a share in the world to come, the Breitowitz says somewhat acerbically, a lot of people better than him had that belief, so he shouldn't go around criticizing. But Rav Albo developed the framework. So, this is by way of introduction to be familiar with what the Sefer Ikarim does. And the Sefer Ikarim goes through all of the Rambam's fundamental principles and raises a lot of questions. And one of the big questions he raises is that one of the Rambam's Ikrei Emunah is that the Torah will never be muchlefet. The Torah will never change. This is called immutability of the Torah. And this is very important because this is the Jewish response to both Christianity and Islam. Because remember, Christianity and Islam concede that Hashem gave the Torah on Har Sinai to Bnei Yisrael. They actually admit there was Matan Torah. They admit everything. They admit the truth, other than the Akedah story that the Muslims switch the characters. But generally speaking, they admit to the narrative of the Torah. But what is their claim? Their claim is that it was superseded. God rejected the Jewish people. God chose somebody else. God spoke through a greater prophet. So immutability of the Torah, that the Torah, it's not just the Torah comes from God. You can believe the Torah comes from God and then it got changed. Two different things. The Torah comes from God and it is unchangeable. These are two separate principles that you have to have. So Rav Albo asks a very simple question. How can you possibly say the Torah is unchangeable if Ben Zoma says when Mashiach comes, a mitzvah is going to drop out. Now, the Rambam in Hilchos Malachim generally says when Mashiach comes, we're going to keep all the mitzvahs. But Rav Albo says, is Ben Zoma an Apikoris? Ben Zoma, who says we're not going to mention Yemota Mashiach, we're not going to mention Yitzias Mitzrayim, Limota Mashiach? Is he saying mitzvahs can change? Can mitzvahs drop out? How could that be? Why isn't that kafira? And if the Rambam will say Ben Zoma was an Apikoris, is the Rambam an Apikoris? The Rambam paskins like Ben Zoma. Right? So the Rambam paskins like the very view that he would regard as heretical. So this is one of Rav Albo's questions on the Rambam's idea that the Torah cannot change. By the way, this is not an occasion for a Tanakh shir, but those of you who learn Nachyomi or some other program, Sefer Yecheskel, may know, if you look at the last 10 parakim of Yecheskel, this raises some very, very, very great questions as well, because Yecheskel describes the Bayit HaShlishi, he describes the final Beis HaMikdash, and he talks about all of the sacrifices that are going to be brought on the Yomim Tovim, Sukkot and Pesach and Rosh Hashanah of the Bayit HaShlishi. And the problem is that the korbanos of Yecheskel are totally different than the korbanos of the Torah. I mean, the Torah in Parshas Pinchas tells you what musafim you bring on the Chagim, right? You're given a list. I look at Yecheskel, he describes a totally different picture. Does that imply there's going to be a new sacrificial rite? Once again, doesn't that also contradict immutability? Or, for example, in Yecheskel, it creates a halacha that's very, very strange. It says a Kohen can only marry a widow if she's the widow of a Kohen. It's a pasuk. Now, in halacha, there's no such rule. Because if I'm a regular Kohen, not a Kohen Gadol, I can marry any widow. I just can't marry a divorcee. And if I'm a Kohen Gadol, I'm not allowed to marry any widow, even a widow of a Kohen. So where do you get some type of rule that says a Kohen can only marry a widow of a Kohen? So the truth of the matter is, if you look in the Gemara Shabbos, it actually mentions that when the Anshe Knesset Hagdola were deciding which works would be canonized as part of Tanakh and which are Chutz L'Machaneh, it wasn't so clear always. Shir HaShirim, for example, almost got censored. It almost got banned in Boston because some people thought it was a sexual poetry, love poetry, and it wasn't holy. Rabbi Akiva made the case that's the metaphor for Hashem's love, etc. Well, Yecheskel is a little less known. Yecheskel was a candidate for Geniza because there were so many verses that seemed to contradict the Torah, and Chazal interpret it in various ways to avoid the contradictions. But once again, if you study Yecheskel carefully, the end of Yecheskel, you will also see this issue of which mitzvot are going to apply when Mashiach comes is not a simple thing. Now, again, the Rambam's opinion generally is all the mitzvahs are going to apply when Mashiach comes. Rav Albo asks, well, what about Zechiras Yitzias Mitzrayim, according to Ben Zoma? So I had mentioned, just to go over it quickly again, the answer of the Rashba, Rav Shlomo ben Aderes, one of the great Rishonim, where the Rashba says that even like Ben Zoma, that we're not going to mention Yitzias Mitzrayim when Mashiach comes, the mitzvah is not really nullified, because the essence of the mitzvah is to give thanks to Hashem for Geula. So if the Geula that we're thanking Hashem for is the Geula of Mashiach, you haven't really gotten rid of the mitzvah, you're just fulfilling the mitzvah in a different form. That's not called nullification of mitzvah, because the spirit and rationale of the commandment are still being preserved. That is what the Rashba says, and therefore the beetle of Zechirat Yitzias Mitzrayim Limot Mashiach is not a contradiction to the immutability of the Torah. The Rashba makes another point, that even like Ben Zoma, there will be many mitzvahs about Yetzias Mitzrayim that we're still going to do. We're still going to have a Seder. We're still going to have a Korban Pesach. We're still going to eat matzah and maror, because on the anniversary of the event, you're still going to bring it up, meaning you're not going to bring it up every day, but it will still have an importance in the Jewish calendar as an anniversary date. So, in other words, it's only Zechirat Yetzias Mitzrayim that's nullified, not Sipor. Sipor Yetzias Mitzrayim, you're still going to do once a year. You're still going to tell this story. But now I want to bring in another sugya. Because once we're talking about the immutability of the Torah, one would think this is mamash a discussion in the Gemara itself. The Gemara in Nida discusses tachriche hames. Tachrichem are burial shrouds. Right? We bury a mace in tachrichem. You'll remember the Gemara in Moed Katan. Originally, people wore whatever they wanted to wear and whatever coffins they wanted to have. So if you were rich, you could be buried in all sorts of fancy clothing, in a big gold and silver coffin. And if you were poor, you did what you did. But it mentions when Rabbi Gamliel, one of the Nisim, died, and he was very wealthy, he instructed that he be buried in simple white garments that every poor person had, and in a plain wooden coffin. Shalo levayesh esmi she'ein lai, not to embarrass people who couldn't afford it. And since then, that became the Jewish practice. In other words, the Jewish practice emerged from Rabbi Gamliel. That's why I remember there was a funeral home in New York. This is ingenious advertising. They were marketing to non-religious people, and they were advocating expensive coffins, bronze coffins and the like. And they say, this is the original Jewish way. The simple wooden box was an innovation. It was not the original way. I guess that's true. Before Rabbi Gamliel, it's similar to something somebody once went up to Rabbi Yitzchak, one of the reformers or the Maskilim, and said, why don't you go with the times, be progressive? He says, no, you're so old-fashioned. He says, no, you guys are old-fashioned. It says in the Haggadah, Mitchila Ovdei Avodah Zarah Hayavosenu. Our forefathers used to be Ovdei Avodah Zarah. You're going back to the real old ways of Klal Yisrael, which are not necessarily that good. So we have Tachrichim, right? In fact, it's interesting that there were Gedolim and Tzaddikim. They would carry their Tachrichim with them all the time, to remember Yom HaMisa, etc. In fact, some would even sleep in Tachrichem or sleep in a grave or whatever. Okay, these are different hanhagas. But the Gemara discusses the following interesting shaila. Let's assume the only burial shrouds you have are shatnez. They're wool and linen sewn together. Are you allowed to bury a met in Tachrichem that are shatnez? Can I bury a mace? Again, this is not going to happen today, but if that was the situation, can you bury a mace with tachrichem of shatnez? So the Gemara says, this is toloi on the following question. These are the actual words of the Gemara. Will the mitzvos be nullified? Liasid lavo, mitzvos betelos, liasid lavo, or mitzvos Eino betelos liasid lavo. What's the idea? Will the mitzvos apply in the future? For that's a term that needs to be defined. If the mitzvos will apply in the future, we have to be afraid that even though when a person is dead, he doesn't have averos. So putting shatnez on a mess, there's no sin being committed. But there'll be resurrection of the dead. And at that point, the laws of shatnez may apply, and maybe resurrection of the dead will occur before the garments disintegrated. So it turns out, at the moment of resurrection, he's committing the sin, albeit unintentionally, of wearing shatnez. So if the mitzvos will be operative, liatid lavo, I cannot put shatnez on him, because maybe he'll be resurrected with shatnez, and it'll be a sin. If, on the other hand, the Gemara says, I take the halachic position that the mitzvos are not going to be applicable in the future, then there's no problem, because even if he's resurrected with shatnez, no problem. The laws of shatnez are no longer going to apply. So the Gemara itself does not even resolve this question. The Gemara says it's toloi on mitzvot betelot liyasid lava. So the simple question is this. What is this question? I mean, if the Rambam says it is fundamental to Judaism that the Torah is not going to be replaced, what is the meaning of the opinion that says the mitzvos will be nullified? Not just one mitzvah. Our Gemara is one mitzvah, Zechiras Yetzias Mitzrayim. This Gemara in Nida brings one opinion, that everything's going to be nullified. You can wear shatnez. How could that be? How could there be such a view, mitzvot betelot liyasid lavo, if you have an ikar, immutability of the Torah? And it's very difficult to say that an actual opinion of a Tana or an Amora is kfir or apikorsis. And we passing like the other opinion. Okay, if it would be a matter of halacha, which is not fundamental, all right, so this opinion, that opinion. But on an ikar emunah, there's going to be an argument. So here, the Maharal says an important qualification. He says, the word liyasid lavo is a very ambiguous word. Because in Jewish eschatology, in Jewish acharit hayamim, we have three terms that you need to be familiar with and differentiate. We have the term olam haba, we have the term yemot hamashiach, and we have the term techiyas hamesim. And it's important to have a clear picture of olam haba, yemot hamashiach, techiyas hamesim. So let me first define them, at least as the Rambam defines them. Olam haba exists even now. It is the world of the neshama. That when a person dies, and that means their body separates from their soul separates from their body. So the soul, putting aside Gehenna, may have to go through a purification process, but ultimately, what is supposed to happen is the soul is reunited with Hashem in the spiritual bliss of what is called Olam Haba, the world of the souls. And the Rambam is very emphatic that unlike the Islamic descriptions or whatever, the world of the soul is totally spiritual. There is no eating. There is no drinking. Even though Chazal use metaphors of mishter, that's simply to give us a sense of the joy that is there. It is the spiritual connection. And yes, they're aware of what's going on earth, etc., that's separate issues, but it is not a physical world at all. And the fact that it's called the world to come does not mean it's not here. It's here right now. I mean, yeah, this is where, Babi and Zaidi and everybody is. Olam Haba. It's here right now. It's called Haba only because vis-a-vis you who are in this world, it's what's coming up. But it's not a future world. It actually is a present reality of Olam Haba. That is called the Olam Haba, which is also termed Olam HaNishamos, and it could also be called Gan Eden Elyon, at least, the upper Gan Eden. There may be a lower Gan Eden, which is even physical, but the upper Gan Eden Elyon, which Chabad sometimes uses for the Rebbe's office, but we refer to it to Olam Haba.
So which one of the Olamos in Tanya is that one?
Which one? What? I didn't.
If you're already bringing in Chabad, it says there are 4 Olamos, Olam Rio.
No. Okay, that's interesting. It doesn't really correlate, but it would actually be Olam Habriya, because Atzilus is only God. Olam Habriya, which is the second highest, is the world of Malachim. So Olam Haba would correspond to Bria, B'Pashtus. Now, Yemosa Mashiach is very much something that's going to happen in this world at some point. We hope in Meirav Yameinu. Many say before the year 6000, although the Rambam does not even bring that as a definitive rule. And that is, there'll be a descendant of Malchus Beis David who will rebuild the Beis Hamikdash, who will ingather all of the exiles of Am Yisrael who did not yet come, who will bring in an era of world peace and shalom, a beautiful world where we can serve Hashem without distraction. But Yemos HaMashiach is this world. And in point of fact, the Rambam says, even when Mashiach comes, life will actually go on in a normal way, although in a much more beautiful way. I mean, having world peace is a wonderful, wonderful thing. But you'll still have to have a job. You're going to have to wait for the bus, and the buses will be more crowded. People will die. People will still die. They'll have long lives, and they'll die. Mashiach will die. Mashiach will die and be replaced with son of Mashiach, meaning it'll establish a hereditary succession, as was the case with David HaMelech. So on one hand, it's a wonderful, wonderful world, but the Rambam makes the point, at least, it will not be a supernatural, miraculous existence. It'll be a world of goodness and a world of Kedusha. I mean, that itself is a great, great miracle, but it's not going to be supernatural. You'll have the Parnasa issues, all the different issues that people face. Now, at some point, now, one second. Now, when people die after Mashiach comes, where do they go? They go to Olam Haba. So Olam Haba continues to exist, even when we move to Mashiach, because Olam Haba is where you ultimately go. Now, at some point in Yemot HaMashiach, it might be a year after Mashiach comes. It might be 10 years. It might be 1,000 years. It might be 1,000,000 years. Meaning the Messianic era can go on forever. There's no 6,000-year limit on Mashiach, per se. There will be resurrection of the dead. And what resurrection of the dead is, it essentially brings Olam Haba into Olam Hazeh. So there's no longer a dichotomy between physical existence and spiritual existence. But essentially, it is the completion of the 360-degree circle that began with the Chet of Adam and Chava in Gan Eden. We're now back where we start. In a way, it's a little disheartening, meaning the whole process is to get us back where we were 5,784 years ago, back to the beginning, which will be eternal. So, which means Olam Haba as Olam Haba ceases to exist with Techiyat HaMesim, because Techiyat HaMesim is the union, the fusion of Olam Hazeh and Olam Haba, and that is eternal. That is eternal. Now, the exact nature of physicality post Techiyat HaMesim is a question. Obviously, it's not going to be gross physicality, but there will never be death again, there will never be illness again, and the like. Now, when Chazal use a phrase, La'asid Lavo, the Asid Lavo is a very ambiguous phrase, and it may not have the same meaning in every passage. Sometimes the Asid Lavo means Olam Haba. Sometimes it means Yemos HaMashiach. Sometimes it means Techiyas HaMesim. It's a vague phrase. Olam Haba, Asid Lavo does not have a fixed token, which means every single statement, I don't have a concordance in front of me to tell you every single place where Asid Lavo is used, but every single passage, you need to examine what is the reference La'asid Lavo, because the three events are once again Olam Haba, Yemos HaMashiach, Techiyas HaMesim. La'asid Lavo can mean any one of those three. Now, it's very clear, says the Maharal, that in Maseches Nida, when it discusses mitzvos betelos, the Asid Lavo, it is referring to Techiyas HaMesim, because that's the whole discussion, that the mace will be revived and be wearing shatnez. So clearly, Asid Lavo there does not mean Mashiach or Olam Haba, it means Techiyas HaMesim. So, based on this very logical interpretation of the word Asid Lavo, the Maharal says the following: that which the Rambam says the Torah will never change only refers to the Messianic era prior to resurrection of the dead. Once there is resurrection of the dead, that is called Olam Chadash. That is a new creation, literally. That's going beyond the laws of nature. At that point, we can have a machlokas. Will the Torah change at that point? Meaning it's not a contradiction. The immutability of the Torah is a reference to Olam Hazeh, even when Mashiach comes. But Tchias HaMesim is really Olam Haba within Olam Hazeh, and that is what the Maral calls Olam Chadash. And Olam Chadash, the rules might be different. So, therefore, the Machlokas in the Gemara is the world of Techiyah, the world of resurrection. The Rambam's Ikar is the world of Mashiach prior to resurrection. Now, as I say, we have no idea how long resurrection, when will Techiyas HaMesim be vis-a-vis Yemotz HaMashiach? And I have a question also. There are a lot of things. I mean, besides the issue of if you were reincarnated, like the Mekubalim say, you were 5 different people, which person comes back? Okay, those are difficult questions. But the simplest answer is that your soul gets fragmented and you come back as 5. Even though you may not know them, but your soulmate is out there.
Like the worm just keeps growing.
Right. But I have the following question: when Techiyas HaMesim happens, some people will happen to be alive when Techiyas HaMesim happens. Let's assume Techiyas HaMesim. I'll make up a time. Let's assume Techiyas HaMesim happens tomorrow. So all of these people who are dead come back. But what happens to us? Do we kind of automatically live forever from now on? Or do we, Taka, have to die even for a second and then come back? Like, what will the process be? And about mitzvos, you also have a difficulty, because if you're telling me that after Techiyas HaMesim, the mitzvos don't apply, or might not apply, that's an opinion, so what does that mean? So my great-grandfather comes back, he doesn't have to wear tefillin. But I didn't die. Do I have to wear tefillin? It's like we're in the house, and one person keeps kosher, one person can have a cheeseburger. Like, how does it work when you're talking about the olam unless you're going to say, once it's the olam hatechiyah, then everybody in that world, it's a new set of rules apply. So there's some questions here. Anything I say is more or less a guess. My guess is that anybody who was alive at the time of Techiyas HaMesim would have to die. And maybe they'll die a second before Techiyas HaMesim and then be resurrected, meaning you can't escape death. Techiyas HaMesim is liberation from death, but you can't have a situation where you don't die. So I think that Hashem will have to cheshbon that everybody will have to undergo a death and then experience the Techiyas HaMesim. Only a few people, Eliyahu Hanavi, there were a few people in our history who did not die, but that is rare. That's not going to be
I thought there was a machloka between the Rambam and the Ramban. The Rambam says the physical reality of Techiyas HaMesim at some point is going to change, and we're just going to be pure Ruhaniyut, and the Ramban is the one who said it would be first.
You actually are correct. I didn't want to get into all of that, but you're actually correct. The Rambam, Maimonides, has a very, very unusual view of Techiyas HaMesim, which is almost never taught. It's amazing. It's the Rambam that is never taught. That is, the Rambam says Techiyas HaMesim is not eternity. The only eternity is the spiritual world of Olam Haba. Techiyas HaMesim, you get revived and then you'll die again. Meaning it's a way station, meaning it is not the finality of things. That is the Rambam's opinion, exactly correct. It is Ramban that views Techiyas HaMesim as the end station of eternity, and all of the Mekubalim follow the Ramban's opinion. And if there's a mainstream view here, the Ramban is the mainstream view. But you are actually correct. This actually goes back to the fact that the Rambam, it's well known, the Rambam disparaged the body. The Rambam did not regard the physical functioning of the body, even though he was a doctor, as of transcendental spiritual significance. So the Rambam could not envision why there would be any ultimate purpose in the physical body enduring forever, which is why those who accuse the Rambam of not believing in physical resurrection were not so wrong, actually. He does believe in it, but he seems to relegate it to a much of a lesser. It'll happen, but then it'll get undone. So yeah, you do have a good point, but I was presenting it based on the Rambam's position. Yeah.
Two questions. What set of rules will we have in the new?
So this we don't know. In other words, we just don't know. It just means that God may decide to that we should live on a higher spiritual plane. In fact, let me just mention as a digression, there was a very, very, very controversial Kabbalistic idea called the doctrine of Shemitos. Let me just mention what the doctrine of Shemitos is. The idea that the world exists for 6,000 years, and then there's 1,000 years of redemption, but then the world is destroyed and recreated. So the idea is that each cycle, the letters of the Torah remain the same, but they will be reconfigured to higher spiritual ideas, because the letters can be broken up into different words. So, yeah.
If everybody dies
Yeah.
now,
Yeah.
is anybody going to sit Shiva for them?
She's so cute. You're so practical.
Well, I'm not sure what you mean, because not everybody dies the same minute. I mean, they'll always, our deaths are staggered. By the way, this reminds me of something, again, apropos of nothing, but it's a very powerful idea. Rabbi Chanan Wasserman, the great Gaon and Tzaddik who died in the Holocaust, had one surviving son who came to America. This was Rav Simcha Wasserman, who was a great man, a gadol b'Torah mamish, and a great tzaddik. He actually even taught in Or Sameach for a while, a long time ago. And he and his Rebbetzin did not have any children. And because of this, she allowed him to go everywhere, to travel, to here and there, to be Marbitz Torah. And when he said, "How can I leave you?" he said, "If Hashem didn't give us children, this is the reason that you should be Marbitz Torah." When he died, she was very ill, and she said she has no desire to live without him, but such a man deserves someone to sit Shiva for him. So she sat Shiva for him. I believe, I don't want to say for sure, she died the day after Shiva. She literally willed herself to stay alive to honor him. That's an amazing thing, yeah.
What will the role of Mashiach ben Yosef be?
So here's the thing. First of all, keep in mind that the Rambam, when he discusses Mashiach, doesn't even mention such a thing as Mashiach ben Yosef. The Gemara mentions Mashiach ben Yosef twice in all of Shas. In the Zohar, it's a very, very big deal. But the apparent idea is Mashiach ben Yosef plays a role in the wars of Gog and Magog before Mashiach, in terms of vanquishing some of the enemies of the Jews, and therefore he paves the way to Mashiach ben David. It is mashma from the Vilna Gaon's writings that Mashiach ben Yosef can also be a movement and not just a person, and the Gra suggests that the building up of Eretz Yisrael is the fulfillment of Mashiach ben Yosef, paving the way. In fact, so instead of people saying, we'll come to Eretz Yisrael after Mashiach comes, the Gra says, coming to Eretz Yisrael and participating in even the physical Binyan Haaretz is a Mashiach ben Yosef activity that will pave the way for Mashiach ben David. This is, again, someone I call the Gra was a supporter. Well, he was before Zionism, but he would have been a supporter of the Zionist enterprise. That may be a little too much, because the Gra was talking about it in the context of a religious environment. But as you know, the Talmidim of the Vilna Gaon did make Aliyah, and they participated in the physical binyan of many shechunot in Yerushalayim. Like the first settlements, or the first neighborhoods outside of the old city walls, whether it's Mea Sharim, Nachalas Shiva, Yamin Moshe, those early neighborhoods. So Moses Montefiore financed them. He gave the money, but a lot of the physical biniyah was Talmidei Hagra. They put the pipes down and everything because they felt that every aspect of Binyan Haaretz was holy, and it should be done by people who were believers in Torah and mitzvos. They thought that would affect the holiness of the buildings of the shuls and everything else. So in that way, the Vilna Gaon was, not that he supported Zionism in all of its manifestations, but he was very, very active in terms of Binyan Haaretz. He himself, as you know, left Vilna to go to Eretz Yisrael. In fact, we have the letter that he wrote to his family, Igeret Hagra, some sidders have it at the end, which is saying goodbye to his family. Somewhat mysteriously, though, he showed up. He came back to Vilna around 6 months later. And, it's hard to ask a Vilna Gaon a question like, why are you back? And people couldn't really ask him so much. And he never really spoke about it. And to this day, there's a lot of mystery as to why the Vilna Gaon did not make the trip. The Talmidim had a Kabbalistic Masorah that the Vilna Gaon was a Gilgul, a reincarnation of Moshe Rabbeinu. And just as Moshe Rabbeinu could not come to Eretz Yisrael, he's trying a second time to come. He says, nope, can't do it this time either. But there's a professor at Hebrew University, Ari Morgenstern, Professor Morgenstern, again, a Talmud Chacham. He develops a very, very interesting theory. He shows that if you look historically at the Vilna Gaon's itinerary, he stopped off in Amsterdam on the way to Eretz Yisrael, and then he canceled his trip. Now the problem is, if you look at a map, Amsterdam would not be it's kind of not in the right direction. Like, why did he stop off in Amsterdam? So the theory that Professor Morgenstern develops is that a person who had lived in Amsterdam, who was just nifter in Eretz Yisrael a short time before, was the Ramchal, Rav Moshe Chaim Luzzatto, who had lived in Amsterdam, got in big trouble in Amsterdam, because he was teaching Kabbalah in a very radical way, and this was shortly after Shabtai Tzvi, etc., and after Spinoza in Amsterdam. So they put him in Cherem, and they ordered him not to, they didn't put him in Cherem, they ordered him not to teach Kabbalah, and as a result, he went to Eretz Yisrael, and he died a short time, a very young man, 40 or so. But it was said that he left many Kabbalistic writings in Amsterdam that talked about the Geula and the bringing of Mashiach. So the Gra was a great admirer of the Ramchal. In fact, the Gra once said if the Ramchal would still be alive, the Gra would walk from Vilna to Amsterdam to learn Torah from the Ramchal. See, it's interesting. The Ramchal today is a mainstream figure. Like everybody, Ramchal. The Ramchal in his life was very controversial. And there were a lot of people that said, Api Koresh, you can't learn from him. In fact, you see, Hashem has a sense of humor. He was ordered. He wrote many works on Kabbalah. He was ordered by the Beis Din in Amsterdam that he either burn them or he cannot teach them. As a result, he had to find something else to write about. So he wrote the Mesilas Yesharim. He wrote the Derech Hashem. He wrote in other words, the only reason we have these books that are the most widely studied is because he was not allowed to teach Kabbalah. What's interesting is he still gets the last laugh because people don't realize that he managed to sneak in Kabbalah in all of those svarim. Even Mesilas Yesharim is actually Kabbalistic work, but the Ramchal's genius, and it really took genius, is he was one of the very few people in history who could express Kabbalistic ideas in non-Kabbalistic language. He didn't use the technical vocabularies of Sfiros and all of that. In his other books, he does. He writes straight. It's all books. In fact, I've seen Mesilas Yesharim with commentaries that try to show you the Kabbalistic framework behind the Ramchal. So, the theory Morgenstern has is, which makes a lot of sense, is the Gra wanted to come to Eretz Yisrael to bring Mashiach. And he detoured to Amsterdam to access the Ksavim of the Ramchal that would help him bring Mashiach. Either he didn't find the Ksavim, we're not sure at this point, or he then determined the generation was not yet ready for Mashiach. So it was not time for him to come. So be it as it may, he did come back to Vilna. He never made another attempt to that for that trip. But his Talmidim, many of his Talmidim did go. Many of the Talmidei Hagra went. And in fact, the Talmidei Hagra are the foundation of what is called the Yishuv Hayashan, right? The pre-Zionist population of Yerushalayim is called the Old Yishuv, and they are primarily the disciples, the Talmidim of the Vilna Gaon, and it is still said that the official, because so many other people have come, the official minhagim of Ashkenazim in Yerushalayim are the minhagim of the Vilna Gaon. Official, meaning, many, many exceptions, but that's it. Now, it's interesting that up north, if you talk about Tzfat and Galil, that was the Talmidim of the Baal Shem Tov. So up north, the Shirish of the Ashkenazic Kehilos are Chassidim. Sephardim were always there. Sephardim were, numerous. They were the ones. 200 years ago, there were almost no Ashkenazim here at all. Or maybe 250, 300 years ago. So Sephardim were around. But in terms of Ashkenazim, the nucleus of Ashkenazim in Yerushalayim are the Talmidei Hagra. And the nucleus of the Ashkenazim in the Galil were the Talmidim of the Baal Shem Tov. And of course, in the course of time, groups migrated and intermingled and the like. This explains, again, forgive me for digressing, this explains an interesting anomaly. Everyone knows that the minhag of Ashkenazim in Yerushalayim and around Yerushalayim is that Birkas Kohanim is recited every day. Kohanim Duchin every day. Now, in Chutz La'aretz, if you remember, your prior life, in Chutz La'aretz, Sephardim do Duchin every day, Sephardim, but Ashkenazim only Duchin on the Musaf of Yom Tov. And already, in the time of the Ramah, this was a very problematical custom. What is the logic of this? The mitzvah of Kohanim blessing the people is not at all defined in terms of Shabbos or Yom Tov. It's a mitzvah every day. So what basis would Ashkenazim have not to recite Birkas Kohanim every single day? It's a big problem. So the Ramah in the 1500s kind of made up a reason as a partial defense. And he said, Birkas Kohanim requires a leiv sameach. It requires that the Kohen have joy in his heart, because only a joyous person can convey a bracha. And in Chutz La'aretz, we don't have joy, except on Yom Tov, even on Shabbos, we're still Taruds. On Yom Tov, we have Simcha. And therefore, we only Duchin when there's Simcha.
Who said that?
The Ramah. Now, this is a very difficult reason, because it's too subjective. Some people are grouchy even on Yom Tov. And some people are happy even during the week. You're making the mitzvah depend on whether you're grouchy or whether you're besimcha. So because of this, the Vilna Gaon himself, Ashkenazi, in Lithuania, said, this is totally wrong. We're going to duchen every day. We're going to duchen every day. Now, the Vilna Gaon, remember, was not the Rav of Vilna. It's very important to know this. The Vilna Gaon had no official position in the Kehillah of Vilna. And the minhagim of the Kehillah of Vilna, which was a very old Kehillah, Vilna existed many hundreds of years before the Vilna Gaon. The minhagim of Vilna were not the minhagim of the Vilna Gaon. But he was given permission from the Kehillah of Vilna to have his own little shtibel minyan, his Talmidim. This is called the Klai. So if you ever looked at the pictures pre-Holocaust, there was a big, big courtyard in Vilna. And there was the big Shola Vilna. And then there were a lot of smaller buildings. And one of the smaller buildings was called the Klois, the Vilna Gaon's show. It was a small building in the big courtyard of Vilna. It was there until the Holocaust. It was destroyed in World War II. It actually was, I'm not sure, again, I don't know if they've built it or reconstructed it. I'm not sure. I haven't been there. But until the Holocaust, you actually could identify the Klois of the Vilna Gaon. But again, in the main Shul of Vilna, they followed regular Ashkenazic minhagim. In the Klois, remember, he needed permission. The Vilna Gaon needed to apply. They gave it to him, but he had to apply for permission to open his own minyan to be able to keep his minhagim. So one of the minhagim he wanted to do was he wanted to introduce Birkas Kohanim every single day, because he felt that the Ramah's minhag, reason for the minhag, was not correct. But it's recorded that every time he wanted to do it, a fire broke out in the clothes. And eventually he saw this as a sign from heaven that he was not supposed to change the minhag, either because of the covet of the Ramah, or Chutz La'aretz is not deserving of Birkas Kohen. At least Ashkenazim and Chutz La'aretz are not deserving of Birkas Kohanim. So Lamaisa, the same way he never made it to Eretz Yisrael, he was never able to introduce duchening every day. But when his Talmidim came to Eretz Yisrael, since the majority were Sfardim who were duchening every day, they could get away with introducing it. So the reason Ashkenazim duchen every day in Yerushalayim is they were following the psak of the Gra under circumstances where they could get away with it. Now, because of the Sfardim. Now, the Galil is very, very strange. Now, today, of course, everybody does it whatever they want. I mean, but technically, the minhag of the Galil, which is Svat and Tiveria, was very strange. They only duchen Shabbos, Musaf. Now that's very strange because there is literally no analog to that. The minhag of Yerushalayim was every day, and the minhag in Chutz La'aretz was Musaf of Yom Tov. Where do you see Musaf of Shabbos? But they say it was Kain like this. The Hasidim didn't follow the Gra, so they only wanted to duchen on Yom Tov. But because they were so small vis-a-vis the Sfardim insisted they duchen every day. So they came up with this uneasy compromise of duchening on Shabbos Musaf. So that was the basis of that. Sorry, yeah. Yeah, that's a very beautiful point. A person always has to know that your deeds are eternal. You know, Rav Schwab used to tell the story that when he was young, he met the Chafetz Chaim. And the Chafetz Chaim was towards the end of his life. And the Chafetz Chaim asked Rav Schwab, "Are you a Kohen?" And Rav Schwab said, "No." He says, then he asked him, "Is your father a Kohen?" He said, well, no. He says, "Is your grandfather a Kohen?" So Rav Schwab was worried that maybe the Chafetz Chaim has dementia or something. The Chafetz Chaim says, "Well, you know, I'm a Kohen because my father's a Kohen and his grandfather was a Kohen." Okay. You know why? Because thousands of years ago, when Moshe Rabbeinu said after the Chet HaEgel, "Who will stand up for Hashem?" Shevet Levi, my great-great-great-great-grandparents answered the call, and that affects who I am today, and your great-great-grandparents didn't answer the call. So he says, Hashem is calling us in every generation, Mil Hashem Elai. Be sure you answer the call, because your response does not only dictate you, it dictates the future of all of your generations. This is what Rabbi used to recount this very much. Okay, you have to run. Ben, we all have a good week, and be well.